back to another episode of Sparking Change, a podcast for prevention. Today, with us, we have Dr. Doug Bolton, who will be talking to us about his new book, as well as prevention work specifically in youth. So, we'd like to give him a warm welcome. And first of all, we'll start off by asking, what is your why? Or what's your why campaign focuses on asking members of our community why they choose to stay substance free. So, if you'd like to share your why, we'd really appreciate it.
It's an important question and a good question for all of us to be reflecting on. I think that when we are looking for ways of changing our experience of the world, I find that changing my experience of the world through relationships is a lot more effective and a lot healthier than trying to change that through substances. So I guess that's my why, and I've just learned more and more research. There's real health costs and mental health costs to using substances, and so that's I guess that's my why.
That'll kind of help us lead into our first question, which is what really inspired you to pursue a career in psychology?
So I left college not quite sure what I was going to do, and I ended up at kind of just by chance at a um, a therapeutic program, summer program for kids with emotional behavioral problems. And it was one of those times in my life that was just like, within like just a few days, I realized, oh, this is what I want to do with my life. And so I began working in therapeutic schools after that as a teaching assistant and realized that just made me even more sure. So then I had to choose between going to a social work program or a PhD psychology program, and I love the mountains, and I got into the University of Vermont psychology program, so I chose psychology, and I've loved this work ever since. I'm very grateful for the people I've worked with and the people that I've learned from.
Thank you so much. So we also wanted to ask, like, why specifically, like, children and adolescents? I know some of the work that you've done has specifically revolved around that. So what led you to that specific specialization?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure. I just have always loved working with kids, and it never really felt like a choice to me. I it wasn't. I actually like working with adults, and I like working with families. But my real passion is how can I work with adults so we can create communities for kids where they can thrive. So I'm not exactly sure why I chose kids, but it didn't seem like a choice. It just felt like, oh, this is so clearly what I want to do.
Yeah, so now we'd like to transition into some of the work that you've done specifically, especially with your new book that you just released recently, which is Untethered. So if you could just tell us a little bit about that, what it was like in the process of creating it, and just an overview of it.
I was principal at North Shore Academy, which is a school for kids with emotional behavioral challenges. I was there as a school psychologist for 7 years and then a principal for 14 years. And when I left, I started doing workshops in professional development, and people would come up to me and say, well, do you have a book about this? And I really had never thought about writing a book. And then COVID came, and I had time on my hands. And so every morning I would just start kind of writing, and I'd try and write about 750 to 1,000 words every morning. And suddenly it became a book, and I was lucky enough to have it published. I don't think I wrote it. I wasn't sure if it would ever be read, but I just loved the writing of it, and I loved being able to share student stories. I love being able to share some of the things we learned at North Shore Academy about how do we think about kids and behavior differently. And so it felt a little bit like it wrote itself. It felt like an organic process.
Yeah, so for a little bit more context for our listeners that may not know necessarily what exactly the book is about, could you just give us like a little overview of what exactly we're talking about?
It's really about how do we understand mental health problems. It's geared towards understanding kids' mental health problems, but it's really about all of us. And it's a book for teachers, and it's a book for parents. And or anybody really who's working with kids or is involved in kids' lives. And as I began to think about how do we understand mental health, I realized that mental health is really about two main things. And when we have these two main things, our lives we're pretty stable emotionally, and our mental health is quite stable. And and when we struggle with these things, it often impacts our mental health, and our mental health impacts these things. So the two things are our ability to form healthy attachments. Um, and for kids, it's not just with peers, but also with adults, our ability to really have the skills to connect with people. Because that's when we think about what helps us be resilient, that's one of the main things, if not the main thing. And then the other one is emotional regulation, our ability to emotionally regulate so that we can respond to the stresses in our lives in ways that are productive and not self-defeating. I talk about trauma because what trauma does is trauma disrupts both our ability to make healthy attachments because it involves the people that are often at the hands of trauma, of our childhood trauma, are people that we're meant to trust and care about, and feel cared for. And it's also very physically and emotionally dysregulating. And then the amazing thing is the research all says the same thing. There's one thing that is the intervention for all of our ability to learn how to attach, our ability to be connected and to be emotionally regulated, and it buffers the impact of trauma, and that's a connected, regulated community. And so, whether it be our families or our schools, I think our work is to embed kids in communities where they're going to thrive and communities where they can develop healthy relationships, communities that help kids regulate and learn how to regulate. In these communities, we know buffer and even reverse the impact of trauma. So that's what it's about.
Yeah, so you mentioned stuff a lot about communities and like creating those supportive communities, especially for the kids. So, what are some things that you would suggest, whether it's parents, administrators, it could apply to almost anyone, or if you'd like to talk about like a specific group of people, but what are steps that we can all take to create those supportive communities?
Well, I think that some of the things in schools, especially that undermine supportive communities, is our push for high levels of achievement. Um, in classrooms, what this means is that we try and, we teach bell to bell, and we don't have time to really connect. We've got short passing periods. Some kids don't have lunches because they're taking so many AP classes. And there's pressure to feel like I've got to get into a selective college. And when we think about selective colleges are defined by the people they exclude, right? The numbers they exclude, and the more people they exclude, the more prestigious, the more elite they become. And I think we've got all of that backwards. The research on belonging is quite powerful. That when students experience belonging, they have better physical health, they have better mental health, they have higher levels of achievement, they have fewer behavior problems, they're less likely to be suicidal, they use fewer substances, all of these pieces. And so I think the key thing for me is um, I don't believe that creating communities of belonging comes at the cost of academic rigor. I believe it is actually essential for academic rigor, but we get that wrong. And we fill our days up with having to move from place to place. And um, the things that get left out are the things that are most important for our mental health, the most important for our physical health, which are the breaks. So I think that what I would say is we all need to have more pauses in our lives and pauses that allow us to connect with one another, pauses that allow our nervous system to just quiet down so that we're not constantly feeling stress. And when we can do those things, then we become healthier. And when we lack those things, then stress builds up in our lives. To be honest with you, it undermines our ability to be successful in school. It undermines our ability to be physically and emotionally healthy.
Yeah, I definitely do think that as a student myself, I can definitely relate to a lot of things that you just said. And I think it's definitely really powerful, especially that stress component that comes with like the academic rigor or just like the application process and everything else that comes hand in hand with that. I think I know there has been a shift, especially recently with like these prestigious colleges and students just feeling that academic pressure. It just keeps increasing and students feel more and more pressured whether it's through their friends or social media. So, how do you think, especially in recent times, whatever the societal factors that have like changed a little bit, what changes do you think have occurred, and like how has that created an impact for the better or the worse for these students?
Back in the year 2000, there was a book published, but it was based on research before then, of course, about how um, our society, it's called Bowling Alone, and it's about how, as a society, we do fewer and fewer things in groups. There are fewer and fewer community organizations. There's fewer and fewer people attending religious services, bowling leagues, whatever it may be, that we're doing less and less of. That's from 1970 to about the year 2000. Um, and I think we continue to see Gen Z is the loneliest generation in the history of generations, right? We're doing more and more things on our own, and I actually think that um, part of what's happened, both in our schools, we've believed that we need to increase academic rigor through having higher academic expectations without giving people the support to be able to meet those expectations. And the people who are able to meet those expectations often feel like their identity is based on their ability to achieve. But there's a lot of people who just can't meet those expectations. If we have a cutoff saying anybody who's above 5'8" is tall and everybody who's below 5'8" is small, and then we say, oh, we're going to change that to 5'10", all of a sudden there are a lot of people who then become and feel smaller. And I think when we start pushing academic expectations, it doesn't mean that our brains develop any quicker. It doesn't mean that that people can't eventually get the information they need and be able to be successful. But we're asking people to do it at younger and younger ages that their brains are just not developmentally able to do, and so it creates stress. And then stress is what undermines our ability to show up the way we want to. The U.S. News and World Report started publishing rankings of colleges, and so all of a sudden, that was in 1985. But the rankings of colleges have nothing to do with kids' experience of college. It's based on how selective they are. The algorithms have nothing to do with mental health or anything else. They have to do with how selective they are. They have to do with all sorts of more random kinds of things. But what ends up happening is we have more and more people applying for fewer and fewer colleges, like college spots, and we're competing against one another, and we're feeling like failures, in spite of the fact that that there are plenty of colleges for all the people to go around. And research says that you don't learn any more if you attend a highly selective or elite college. You don't make more money 10 years afterwards. And yet this becomes the things that drive most of our senses of our feelings of success, and the way we are driven to achieve both academically and getting into selective schools or on the travel team or whatever it may be. Those things have been amplified in the last few decades that played a huge part in the mental health crisis we're seeing now.
Yeah, so what do you suggest specifically for students that are going through this process? What are certain things that you think that would be the most powerful mindset shift almost? Obviously, each circumstance is different and every student has an individual career path that they desire to take. But what
Yeah.
do you think overall is something that we should really be focusing on, especially when it comes to reducing these numbers of substance use, which have seen a spike along with the spike in stress and pressure on students.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned that because, in 2019, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation named the top environmental stresses harming adolescent wellness: poverty, discrimination, trauma, and the last one was excessive pressure to excel. And so, and I don't think it's just students that feel this. I think as educators, I've felt this pressure. I think parents feel this pressure. It's in the water that we drink. The thing that is most important for me as I think about this is being able to separate our anxiety from the truth, which is whether we go to Northern or whether we go to Northwestern. You know what the biggest impact on whether or not how much we learn is? How much we study. It's not about the place where you go, right? The the focus on needing to have as many AP classes and to get fives, fours or fives in those AP classes. I think we need to be careful about seeing these things as the metrics that I identify our worthiness as people. And I think that as a society, we need to begin to separate um, what we achieve from who we are, because I don't think what we achieve is an accurate description of who we are. And in fact, our pressure to achieve often undermines our ability to truly be able to embrace the people we are. So I'm not sure if that's too loose, but I guess I do think that there needs to be a shift for us. And I believe that the pressure that kids experience, so kids in high achieving schools are 3 to 7 times more likely to experience depression, anxiety, and substance use. And so these things are all wound up together, that we've got to find ways of coping when things get hard. And oftentimes, substances are a very quick way that people seek that kind of relief from the stress that they're experiencing. And there's nothing that quite as powerfully undermining as substance use issues.
We really appreciate your thoughts on this topic. I think it's definitely become increasingly prevalent in youth as well. So I really appreciate you taking the time to talk about this. That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening, and make sure to follow us on Instagram at catalyst_SHS for more updates. Also, follow our podcast on Spotify at Sparking Change, a podcast for prevention, by clicking the links in our description for more information. Bye-bye.